And I want to say this to the television audience, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook.
Something has gone seriously wrong with the Democratic Party, and for many old-school Democrats, it's hard to watch.
Democrats must figure out why so many voters still say to them, "You're good enough, you're smart enough, but doggone it, we don't like you."
And it's true. On most of the major issues, a majority of the Americans are aligned with the values of the Democratic Party. Most Americans do want to address climate change. Most Americans don't want to get involved in foreign wars. And most Americans do want to support the working class and want to give less tax breaks and support to big business and the rich. On so many issues, a majority of Americans lean towards the Democrats. And yet, despite this natural alignment, something has caused the Democratic Party to lose support because people just don't like the Democratic Party anymore.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party.
I realized, I could never vote for a Democrat ever again.
Why did I leave the Democratic Party?
I'm done with them. Completely. The Democratic Party, every single one of them, that includes the squad, I don't care anymore. They have not delivered.
And I say, I don't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me.
We are in the middle of a monumental shift, a great realignment of the voting base, and it has largely accelerated due to changes in the Democratic Party. So let's see what the hell is going on here, and welcome to another episode of Political Tricks.
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
So you are
pregnant.
denying that trans people like this thing?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you? Or
We're going to beat these people.
Talk to normal, everyday people. They've got some views that are conservative, some views that are definitely on the left.
I'm still talking.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
That's encouragement.
They're eating the dogs.
Weird.
I live in the capital. I live when I live. You're a white male. You're a white man.
And then, we got 10 of those and 20 million leaf blowers.
Do you identify as black?
I'm kind of retarded.
So how has the Democratic Party changed exactly? You could say that it has changed because it is worse than ever on the major issues that unite most Democrats, and you wouldn't exactly be wrong. Take climate change for instance. I barely hear anything from the Democrats about the fact that scientists around the world are screaming at us to sound the alarm on this issue. All I hear is the sound bites from Kamala Harris just vocalizing her support for fracking.
As president, I will not ban fracking.
And this is at a time when we are just years away from causing irreparable harm to the climate systems. And we are at a very dangerous tipping point in Antarctica, where Thwaites Glacier, a glacier the size of Florida, is being slowly detached from the landmass because warm water is slowly working its way underneath the iceberg and melting the ice and separating it from the mainland. In other words, Thwaites Glacier is hanging on by its fingertips, and if it is separated, it will float north and melt quickly, causing catastrophic sudden rise in sea level. And yet, not a peep about this from the Democrats. And the Democrats have always loved getting involved in wars, but this is the first time I haven't heard any kind of anti-war rhetoric from the left. Barely any. I mean, even Trump talks about ending the war and talks about it in human terms, of not wanting people to die.
Mr. President, can I just follow up on that because that's a really important statement that you just made there. Can you say if you want Ukraine or Russia to win this war?
I want everybody to stop dying.
And the Democrats are no longer so pro-working class like they used to be. They were always weaker in this area than they should have been, but now it's like they don't even try to hide it. Early in 2023, the Democrats topped up funding of the Ukraine war for $113 billion, plus bailed out the Silicon Valley Bank with $25 billion. While in the same time frame, early in 2023, the President Biden kicked millions of people off of Medicare and reduced the food stamps by as much as 90% for millions more. So sure, the Democrats have gotten worse, but they've always been pro-big business and pro-war and, insufficient in the response to climate change. And they've always been bad on other issues too, like they never codified Roe v. Wade because Roe v. Wade was a good carrot on a stick to induce voters to vote for them when they needed to. They would always promise, we'll codify Roe v. Wade, but they never did. Even when they had the presidency and the House and the Senate, they never pushed that bill through. The real changes that have occurred in the Democratic Party's culture. The first major change in culture is that the Democratic Party no longer observes the democratic processes of its own mandated primary process. In other words, they do not let us choose our presidential candidates any longer. And the result is voters just leave because they are not being represented and the core issues are no longer being pushed. And the second major change to the culture is in its embrace of identity politics and the woke cultural movement, resulting in the Democrats facilitating cringeworthy attacks on its own people and principles, and thereby chasing people away and distracting the party from pursuing its original priorities discussed above. In this video, we're going to look at the first big change, which is how the Democratic Party has corrupted its own democratic processes. The Democratic Party has demonstrated a startling new trend of obstructing the chosen candidates of the people from participating in the democratic process. Obstructing competition from high office is profoundly undemocratic because it prevents the people from voting into office who they want to be there. And that's why the United States of America has a tradition of not prosecuting its presidential candidates. Or that's the way it used to be anyway. There is a startling new trend of sabotaging popular candidates, and it seems to have begun in earnest with Bernie Sanders back in 2016. Bernie Sanders wasn't your average divisive politician. He was kind, he was direct, and he pulled from the left, right, and center with his populist message.
We have a corrupt political system in which money, big money, buys elections.
If Wall Street does not end its greed, we will end it for them. No more wars.
And he quickly became one of the top two candidates on that primary stage. But we soon found out that Bernie Sanders wasn't popular with everybody. And it wasn't just the media going after him. There was trickery going on behind the scenes at the DNC.
We learned today from former Democratic National Committee Chairwoman Donna Brazile that the Clinton campaign, in her view, did rig the presidential nominating process by entering into an agreement to control day-to-day operations at the DNC. The Clinton campaign controlling the party's staffing, strategy, finances, communications, and that agreement was entered into in August 2015, a year before she defeated Senator Bernie Sanders. This must shock you.
Look, this is a real problem. But what we've got to do as Democrats now is we've got to hold this party accountable.
So what happened here exactly? The head of the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, agreed to give over the day-to-day operations of the DNC to the Hillary Clinton campaign. And what's the reason for this outrageous agreement? The DNC needed a bailout because their finances were in trouble. And I guess Hillary Clinton's campaign was able to provide it.
This after thousands of emails published by WikiLeaks leads to a scandal.
The role of the party chair is to be 100% neutral, 100% objective, and I think the email suggests that in the case of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC, they weren't, and that's why she's not going to be DNC chair going into the election in November.
So you're telling me that Hillary Clinton's staff was put in charge of the day-to-day operations of the administrative body that was responsible for overseeing the integrity of the primary process in the very election that Hillary Clinton was a candidate in? This is profoundly undemocratic. It's like saying that the Patriots get to control the stadium, the lights, and the inflation of the footballs in the next Super Bowl. And of course, the experts will say that Hillary Clinton's control of the day-to-day operations of the DNC were inconsequential to the outcome of the primaries. But of course, this is always what happens. This is always a kind of gaslighting that happens after a coup. And the sad thing is that Bernie Sanders was favored to beat Trump by a wide margin in 2016. Not only did Bernie have none of the baggage that so-called crooked Hillary and the Clintons had, but Bernie also pulled from the right, left, and center, which further ensured the stability of these poll numbers. And when the unstable poll numbers of Hillary Clinton proved wrong and she lost later that year to Donald Trump, people didn't forget that the trickery during the primary process is where it all went wrong.
Democrat Greg Traynor said he wanted a primary do-over.
None of this would have happened with Bernie Sanders.
And that was just round number one. In round number two, Bernie ran again in 2020, and this time his popularity was through the roof.
What's going to be different this time?
We're going to win.
He quickly gained front-runner status, and again the media threw mud at him, hoping that it would stick.
CNN nothing but disdain every time they talk about Bernie Sanders. Now, I've shown even MSNBC does it. Fox News certainly does it. Even the Associated Press from time to time does it.
The establishment is freaking out. The corporate media, to a larger degree, is freaking out. As you're aware, some really horrific things have been said about me on at least one television channel.
And again, the DNC was also up to its old shenanigans. But this time, they tried something more audacious. They tried to change the rules to allow superdelegates to vote early. See, the way that delegates work is the following. The people vote for their chosen candidate, and the delegates that represent them basically take this as a direct order to vote accordingly. And so, if a candidate gets enough votes, that means that they get enough delegates to basically cinch the nomination, and they get to represent the party in the run for the presidency. So where does a superdelegate come into all this?
The delegate chase is close, right? Well, the primaries and caucuses decide pledged delegates, and after 3 contests, okay, don't get any closer than that. 51 for Sanders, 51 for Clinton. But Hillary Clinton's win in Nevada was important yesterday because she has a super lead among superdelegates. These are elected officials, other Democrats, who by the rules of the party get votes at the convention. They can vote their hearts. Doesn't matter where their state or local voters go for. Hillary Clinton with a huge lead when you add in her superdelegates.
Basically, a superdelegate is the brainchild of some corrupt politician who decided that just leaving it up to the peasants wasn't good enough. That you had to give the party members, the elite party members, a vote at the delegate level without having to, listen to the people below them. But the blatant and intended use of superdelegates against Bernie Sanders in 2016 was so unpopular that it encouraged changes in 2018 to the superdelegate process. Basically, it said that superdelegates could no longer vote, except in very limited situations, such as a deadlock. And even this, in my opinion, was still a violation of the democratic process, but it was a big step in the right direction. Unfortunately, despite these changes, establishment members once again tried to stop Bernie Sanders in 2020. This time by hoping to adopt rule changes that would once again give superdelegates the power to subvert democracy. And even when this was rejected for being much too unpopular, there was still talk of getting involved and swinging the election in the direction of the preferred candidate if the election was too close. Sounds to me like the original rule changes didn't go far enough. So that was in 2016 and 2020. What about now in 2024? Well, the DNC is up to its old tricks again, and this time they went after lifelong Democrat RFK Jr. First, they didn't have a primary for Joe Biden like they should have, even though it was clear that he was suffering from cognitive decline and that he might not be able to continue as president. And second, despite the growing calls for action, they waited until the last minute, until after Biden's disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump, to finally call for a replacement of the aging president.
Trump? I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
And then suddenly, Kamala Harris was declared the presumptive nominee for president.
Good evening. Thank you.
And they didn't even hold a primary for her, saying that they didn't have enough time. How convenient.
I know a lot of people, I know Harold, for instance, was in support of a mini primary of some kinds, and everyone was trying to game out, you could have battleground town halls, for instance, let delegates vote. We have no time.
They forced in Kamala Harris, despite the fact that she's never been popular.
The New York Times had 8 of their prized columnists grade potential candidates on electability. She was the last.
So basically, everyone accepted the new nominee for president without a single vote being casted in a primary.
We are here today to throw our support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm clapping. You don't have to.
So now, for RFK Jr., the legitimate path to the primary and then to the presidency was closed off due to DNC shenanigans once again. So RFK decided to go independent.
I'm here to declare myself an independent candidate.
But going independent wasn't going to be easy for RFK Jr. He would have to get onto the ballot of 50 states, and he only had a few months left to do so.
I would need over 1 million signatures, something no presidential candidate in history had ever achieved. Our 50-state organization collected those millions of signatures and more.
So RFK Jr. was able to collect the signatures he needed, but the real challenge still lied ahead.
The DNC waged continual legal warfare against both President Trump and myself. The DNC dragged us into court, state after state, attempting to erase their work and to subvert the will of the voters, it deployed DNC-aligned judges to throw me and other candidates off the ballot.
So the DNC endeavored to stop RFK Jr. in several states. Meanwhile, he received blockbuster poll numbers again and again and again. He was the biggest third-party candidate since Ross Perot. The people wanted him on the ballot, but in the end, a technicality concerning an address kept him off the ballot in the crucial state of New York. Now this is the important part. When it comes to democracy, tradition dictates that we forego technicalities. This is expressly why our Constitution has very few limitations on who can run for president. Even a felon is allowed to run for president because it guarantees that the people get to elect who they want, and that powerful special interests don't have a way to stop someone from running that they don't like. After the setback in New York, RFK Jr. knew that he couldn't win the presidency. So he called Kamala Harris to suggest throwing his weight behind her and thereby almost guarantee that she would win the election. And in exchange for his help, he asked for a cabinet position from which to clean up our toxic food system here in the United States of America. But the Democratic candidate for president wouldn't even entertain a phone call with him. So is it little wonder now why RFK Jr. joined Trump, who is offering him a cabinet position and a venue by which he can still do some good. So it's clear that the DNC has endeavored to prevent the popular candidates of the people from running for president. They did it twice to Bernie Sanders, once in 2016 and again in 2020, and they just did it now in 2024 to RFK Jr. And to add insult to injury, they decided to shoe in an extremely unpopular presidential candidate in Kamala Harris, a woman who supposedly represents progressives, but has anything but a progressive record as a prosecutor. And this is someone who has no serious policy positions of her own, and so constantly flip-flops on major issues. A person who is a gaffe machine.
This whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe.
We're looking at over 220 million Americans who just in the last several months died.
And this is a woman who absolutely horrified traditional Democrats by accepting the endorsement of neocon Republicans like Dick Cheney.
I'm honored to have their endorsement. And
would you excuse me one second?
What happened to that glorious time not so long ago when Democratic candidates would reject endorsements from bad actors?
She talked about getting the approval or the support or the mentoring of Henry Kissinger. That Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger.
The DNC has even changed the rules of the primaries by making superdelegates, which gives electoral power to the elite party members and thereby gives them a profoundly undemocratic way to subvert the will of the people. And even when the power of superdelegates was curtailed by popular demand, they still showed a willingness to try to control the primary process and subvert the will of the people. So is it any wonder that many Democrats are feeling disenfranchised by their own party and that some are looking to cast their ballots elsewhere? But to be honest, the disenfranchised voters of the Democratic Party can't blame all their dissatisfaction on the DNC and the elites. Some of the blame also goes to the people of the Democratic Party itself, who have embraced a new movement that has radically divided the Democratic Party and the nation itself. This movement is known as the woke cultural movement. So what we're going to do in the next video, which is part 2 of this series, is take a look at the woke cultural movement and see how it's redefined liberalism along more extreme ideological lines, and how this ideology has infiltrated the Democratic Party and is probably largely responsible for the sudden and stunning demographic shift of voters away from the Democrats and the left. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you think I missed something or just want to keep the conversation going. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and please don't forget to vote.
I'm not a crook.